All right. Thank you. I'm Dutta-Gupta with the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality. And when I'm not wearing that sort of professional work hat, I am also involved in various, I always say, resistance and rebuilding efforts, including, if folks have questions, I'm on the executive committee for the Tax March, just focused both on transparency, but also fairness and economic justice and racial justice. So I'm excited to introduce the lineup here today for the third panel. It's a pretty remarkable group. I'm going to let everyone actually go through and introduce themselves one by one, and I'm going to just ask them to say anything you want to say about sort of yourself, your personal background, but then identify what you think are the biggest opportunities and the challenges in the current political moment. We just had one of those, what was the viral BBC, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry about that. So why don't we actually start on the other end with Yasmin, and then we'll go to Jeohn and come forward.
Introduction and the answer to the question?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Yasmin Radjy, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Resistance School, organization that has existed for 1 week and 1 day. So we're brand new, but we're very excited. We launched last night, and I'll talk more about that afterwards. But I think the biggest challenge, for our time is that there's this great surge of energy, which I think is pretty obvious given how many new organizations are coming up on the map. And I think the work of really sustaining the kind of mobilizing and organizing needed to win in 2018 and 2020 and far beyond that is going to require unprecedented levels of collaboration, and also the integrated work of new organizations that are being extremely entrepreneurial and nimble, and also deeply rooted organizations that have been around for a really long time and have been and are deeply aware of the challenges of local, state, and federal reform. And so figuring out those broad-based coalitions is going to be a critical challenge to win.
Hi, my name is Jeohn. I'm a third-year student here at Harvard Law School. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming from afar, for having the event here. I am one of the co-founders and on the board of advisors for the Arena, which is an organization that started in the aftermath of the November election, originally named the Arena Summit. I guess in the days after the election, a number of mostly friends who had some connection to mostly the Obama administration campaign 2008 kind of got together. We had a lot of friends who said we needed something to do, and we organized what was first a summit in Nashville, where we brought together about 450 people from around the country who were interested in getting more involved in politics. Getting into the arena, that is. So the organization seeks to activate the next generation of civic leaders, both people running for office and others looking to support people running for office. We've had our second summit in Raleigh about a week ago. It was 600, Raleigh, North Carolina. Yeah, we had a few folks in the room who were there, about 650 folks who were there, some great speakers, and just kind of, and maybe answering the question a bit of what's the biggest challenge. I'd echo much of what Yasmin said here, where it's, everyone is excited, everyone wants to do something, and people, I think, oftentimes are looking for what to do. Particularly with the Arena, we often find that people think about running for office, they've thought about it for a long time, but they don't really know how to get involved, how to step up, and it's an organization that hopefully is trying to get folks to just get in the arena and get involved and get out there and running. We've expanded beyond just having summits, which we're going to continue to have. We have our next one in Detroit in June. But we're going to do those about quarterly. And we also created an accelerator program where we're looking for organizations who are trying to, as we say, there's a lot going on in this space, and we're trying to sort of connect new organizations with resources and fundraising networks and just sort of the expertise, either legal, organizational, strategy-wise, to get new organizations in this space up and running. I'll pause there.
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Bowen. I'm the Minister of Social Justice at Shiloh Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. It's a 152-year-old church founded by 21 former slaves out of Virginia. And I'm also the director of the Mayor's Office, Mayor Muriel Bowser, Mayor's Office of Religious Affairs in Washington, D.C. I think the biggest challenge in my work, because in my number one position, I'm the chief advocate of the faith community in Washington, D.C., but I'm also the chief critic of the faith community in Washington, D.C. The challenge is not for us to find that small piece of wood adrift in the water, a common ground, but to find common ground that expands that to a ship, to get the faith community to stop hiding behind tradition and doctrine, and to embrace more progressive issues that may not be comfortable to them, such as LGBTQ rights and environmental rights and the like. That seems to be the challenge, but one that will bring them along one way or the other.
Hey everyone, my name is Clare Bresnahan. I'm the executive director of a group called She Should Run, and just deeply honored to be here. Thank you to the Institute and the Fund for inviting me. And She Should Run is it's a 501c3 that's focused on how do we get more women and girls to even be interested in running for office in the first place? So very often the main name we know in this game for women in politics is Emily's List, which is important. They do very important work. But the fact is that we have 500,000 elected positions in this country, and I want to share a sobering fact that we are on the trajectory where we will not see parity in anyone in this room's lifetime, even our little babes. And if that doesn't scare you or make you mad, then you need to wake the hell up. And our whole purpose in life is to try to at least look at any woman in this room and say that our country needs you in elected leadership. And if it's elected office isn't for you, then come join the cause of helping this country give a damn about women's equal representation. And for us, the challenge and the opportunity, right, because there's always a flip side on that, is that since Election Day, we have had over 10,000 women join our incubator, raising their hands and saying, I want to run for office. And very often these are women who a year ago wouldn't have even thought about it, wasn't even on the radar. So we have on our minds how to keep momentum going. And on the flip side of that is fatigue, whether it's donor fatigue, whether it's the activist fatigue, or whether it's our women who being with them in the long-term game. This is another challenge for us, is to help folks. I know a lot of folks are focused, and they should be, on the short-term strategies of what's coming up in 2018 and 2020, but our eyes are on what's happening in 2030, what women are running in 2050, also because so much of our programming is also focused on girls. So that balance between keeping momentum up, both for the different stakeholders, but then also how do we, as a movement, maintain both short-term and long-term strategy.
Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Okay, great. My name's Amber Goodwin, and I'm the founding director of the Community Justice Reform Coalition. I also want to echo thank you so much for having all of us here. I've learned a lot already so far, and thank you to Andrea. We met each other almost 10 years ago, so just as an FYI, if you meet me today, you're never getting rid of me, because I will find you online or offline and make you my friend. So I'm excited to be here with a lot of people I know and respect. So our organization was started about 10 months ago, kind of as a way to answer the question on how do we bring people who are most impacted by gun violence and the criminal justice reform together, and then also to have them be the forefront of a movement. So our work is centered around policy, funding, and leadership development with communities of color, specifically on gun violence prevention and the nexus between gun violence prevention and the criminal justice system. And so we do that in a variety of ways that I'm sure that we'll talk about today, but our scope is national. We're a C3 and have the ability to do some C4 work, but we do partner a lot with kind of electoral work to make sure that we're thinking about candidates actually running and winning on an issue like gun violence, which was considered the third rail of almost every single party about 15 years ago. But most, again, of our work is trying to make that direct, very implicit connection between gun violence and the criminal justice system. So when we're thinking about policies, we're thinking about the impact in communities of color on every single level of government. So I have a lot of thoughts on your question, and so I'm going to try and keep it very, very simple. I think one of the biggest challenges is that for a lot of us, I had heard the word intersectionality before 2016, and I think it's become a hashtag and not necessarily an active verb, and so I think that's been part of the challenge. I think even with women of color, white women, with men, I think there's a lot of intersections in a lot of this work, and how do we do that in a really intentional short-term and long-term way? And then I also think, and I think I only missed, or I saw part of what Rashad talked about, but I think, and he says this a lot more eloquently than I do, but the people who are closest to the pain are furthest away from the power across the board, right? And so how do we get the people who feel the pain every single day, instead of CNN or all these people calling me and asking me to speak on all these panels, how do we get the people who are directly impacted by a lot of this work, whether having them run for office or campaign to run for office, but get them actually telling their own stories versus us telling them for them.
My friend Ashley. Thanks for having me. I met Andrea a week ago at the arena, so thanks for making magic, having allowed me to be here, and good to see some folks that I've known from other chapters in my life on the panel. I used to work for the president, not 45, but our president,
yes.
President Obama. And I finished in January, so I am turning the corner of grief and recovery, and probably will be starting something in the next month and a half or so, but right now I'm just a resting but still engaged citizen. I think that the biggest challenge right now is that our analysis for what is happening in democracy will be very elementary and very just basic. And I think it might be, that is going to be the challenge, because some of the questions that have to get asked will be very uncomfortable for people, and the answers will require people to be very vulnerable to tell the truth. And if we aren't courageous enough in this moment to actually speak truth and give people the power to be honest, even if that reality is hurtful to your whole life's existence, we'll fail. And this moment will just be something that our kids will read about in history, and we will be repeating the playbook that wasn't working in 1984 in 2030. So I think that's the big challenge.
That's great. So let me actually pick up on a point that Amber, your work is sort of in many ways centrally focused on and related to racial justice and racial equity. And I'd like to open it up for everyone, but I'd like to start with you, Amber. So how do you talk to people about the importance of racial justice if it's not obvious to them? How do you talk to people about why it's central to a broader movement, for social change? And then I'd love to get others to comment on it as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know this is being recorded, but whatever. So I actually had somebody very prominent in our movement ask me, how do we get white people to care about Black lives? And I was like, I am not going to answer that question for you. It was a white person who was asking me this in a room full of white people, and they wanted me to answer the question on how white people could get engaged and care about the hundreds of thousands of Black people who die by homicides every single year. Right, so I think a little bit to like Ashley's point, that a lot of analysis is just off on like how we're actually talking about this work, and so I think we need to have a lot of hard conversations, and that's what we do. So prior to founding CJRC Community Justice Reform Coalition, I worked for a couple of years for Gabby Giffords and Mark Kelly's gun violence prevention organization, where I learned so much about the policies, but I also learned a lot about the gaps that were in laws and kind of the implementation of them. And so a lot of our work is showing the impact of these policies on every single level of government. So, I had a phone call with the staffer for the CBC, and I say the same thing to them that I do to, a police chief in Milwaukee or wherever it is. And so I think part of our work, and I think a lot of the work of us, of people up here on the panel that work specifically at the different intersections of race, is making sure that there's a specific voice, an intentional voice, specifically for people of color, that is an analysis across the board for all of the work that we're doing. Our work is hyper-local, but we have to talk about it on a national level. So we actually just launched a 50-state strategy. Before I started working gun violence, I didn't even know that there were Black people in Delaware, and we did this big policy initiative, and there were all these Black people who showed up, and I was like, who knew? But there's a big Black population in Delaware, and there also is a large gun violence prevention problem in a lot of the cities, and in almost every city across the country, there are these pockets of individuals who are creating most of the homicides across the country. And I'm sure that you know this from working in the city. I think the statistic is less than half of 1% of a city's population is actually responsible for over 70% of the crime and the homicides that happen. So it's a very, very small number. And so part of what our education is on letting people know that you don't just have to talk about Sandy Hook and you don't just have to talk about Chicago. There's everyday violence that's happening every single day, and that there's a part that everybody can play in making sure that the smallest population that is impacted, whether it's through homicides, whether it's through accidental deaths, whether it's through suicides, that we need to play a collective part. And so I think, it's a challenge working for a national organization, but all of our work I think every morning and every time I'm thinking of a different program or spending any sort of money is how do we get to those very small amount of people who are impacted by gun violence every day.
Just to continue on Amber's points, and I forgot, since I went first, I didn't describe our organization, I forgot, but the Resistance School is an online practical training program that, like I said, we launched last Tuesday, went live last night. We had 15,000 people, 15,000 groups logged on to our first session last night. We have 4 sessions, and to the point of your question is our model is that we think a lot of the important work of talking about really tough issues has to happen face-to-face, even though we're living in this high technology age. So those 15,000 groups that signed up were all in a physical space together. And the idea of providing each of those groups with practical skills is that they are active online. We had amazing Twitter and Facebook comments, but then they go and as they develop more skills, they actually learn how to have those face-to-face conversations with people who don't agree with them within the movement and on the other side. And they build the confidence because, Amber, I think, brought up a really important point, which is the people who are most affected by really troubling policies, not just from the White House, but all the way down to state legislatures and city councils. It's not that they don't have the talent to talk to their representatives or the talent to make a difference. It's that they feel like, activists are people who have a certain set of skills, a certain level of extroversion, a certain level of education, and if they can build the confidence through training, we think a lot of that tough work of really engaging in civic life will be made both easier and also far more broad-based because it's all free and not everybody gets to go to a place like Harvard and get these amazing training courses for a very high tuition.
I said this, I don't always say it actually, I said it for the first time last week, at least in public, but I think it a lot. That to have a conversation about race with me is just to have a conversation with me because I'm black, and I'm not speaking for every black person, but I am speaking with 34 years of experience as a black woman, and that has to count for something. And so if you want to address the issue on women of color and you want to change the work around or, the programs and work on the issues of women of color, you have to have women of color there. And if you don't, you are failing before you start. And so I think in this moment, but in all these moments, right? I loved Rashad talking about, 2008 was like the most recent time when white progressives felt like they had a space. But there was a lot of energy of non-white progressives around the 2008 election, right? It engaged me in politics in a way that it has never engaged me before. The problem was that when it worked in our favor, people wanted to own the movement. But when it doesn't work in our favor, people want to blame a group of folks for the movement that don't rightfully deserve the blame, right? So I don't want to Monday morning quarterback the 2016 election because we all could do that, but we lost, right? And that's just the reality. And unfortunately, you can't go back in time and change anything. But I don't actually think what happened in 2016 was anything new. I think it happened in 2000 with the third party candidate. And it's not because there were a lot of things that were said today that were a bit, and this might be the time to have the honest conversation, were a bit offensive to people who live the realities of life and death in our current situation, but lived it on November 7th also, right? And So when you talk about storytelling, that is first of all, that's a very cultural thing, but it's very important because you're not going to know why someone did not go and vote from a voter file. You know when you go to their door and you sit in their living room and you have a conversation with them and you hear their story and you know what is rooted in them and you realize, I love President Obama, and if you talk about him, I'm coming for you, right? But the reality is that people who didn't vote in 2016, they didn't vote because they didn't feel their lives were different, right? Black people, at least, right? They did not feel invested in this. They did not feel like the system was working for them. It was not because they were trying to like challenge the Democratic Party. They don't care about the Democratic Party. They care about their lives. Yeah. They care about if they're able to feed their children. They care about if their kids are getting a good education. Not who's the DNC chair. They don't even know that the DNC election was happening, right? Like, I think we live, and I worry sometimes that we're living in this bubble of like politics, not just DMV, like the DC, Virginia, Maryland area, but like this bubble of politics, and that if you are here, like then the answer probably is not in this room because we're already here. We're already engaged. We took a whole day off of work to be here. So the answer probably is not here because we're probably not, we're already privileged enough. So the answer isn't in me. I have some recommendations to provide, but it's not rooted in me. The other thing is that, you know, I think people, I also like a lot of groups, and I also think this is like a racial lens, because I am really worried right now that after the reality is that like 53% of white women voted for Hillary Clinton. I can't own that. I'm not a white woman, and I'm not gonna own it, right? And like, if you're a white woman, go talk to another white woman about why they voted for her. Because I own it all the time, right? That's like the hashtag Black woman at work. I'm not doing it. I'm not carrying that burden. I will carry like why Black people didn't show up to the polls and work on those issues. And I have done that before. But I do think that like the reality is that like groups were failing. Obviously, like we're not doing something right because we're in the situation that we're here. But it's not like money was just flushed before the election at these groups, right? So let's just make sure that's clear. And now that there is a surplus, like I was still at the White House, so I couldn't do it, but like I wanted to start an election or a group after the 2016 campaign, but I haven't, right? But you see on this last panel, except for like one exception, and I shouldn't just, you know, I have an issue with like sometimes putting judgment on people, projecting stuff on people, but it appeared that like there were 3 white women up here, or white people up here that did do something, right? So there's another layer of privilege that exists where people of color are not popping up new organizations. We're like, where can I help? Where can I dig in? But like the issue is, if we're talking about a shifting voting bloc, we should be empowering people of color to be leading this, women to be leading this, and we're not. Instead, it's like, well, help me understand like what's going on in your community so I can lead. No, go to the community and find out who's leading and help. Don't try to be the leader. Go and be a part of the existing community. But that's not what's happening right now. And I think that that's just the reality of our society. And we can take a racial lens off of it, but if you honestly want to apply one to it, it's like, it's white people that are popping stuff up. Rashad's been doing this since Hurricane Katrina, right? How many people knew about Color of Change before like the last 2 years? He's been digging at it and talk about how hard it's been to fundraise for Color of Change. But he's committed, right? And he wanted his people to feel liberated from the oppression, and he did it whether or not he was getting a paycheck or not. So I just think that like there is this really false narrative happening right now that, you know, people are rolling up their sleeves and digging in, and like it's so hard, but this is actually probably one of the easiest times to organize. What will be hard is after 2018 if we don't take anything back.
What I would just like to add is that I think it's always important to call out that the women in politics movement has been and still continues to be majority white woman led. And so just from the She Should Run perspective, it's important to us to make sure that I can't be the only messenger. If we're wanting to encourage women of color to run for office, it can't be me who's the main person waving that flag. It's important for every single program, every single piece that we put out there, that it's women of color who are elected or who have run for office who are sharing their experiences and working with women who will have lived through those experiences of, just as it's different to run as a woman from any community, particularly it is different experience running as a woman of color, and to be able to talk about those experiences one-on-one is really important. So at least from us, for how we're addressing, making sure that race is both addressing racism on the campaign trail as a part of it, is making sure that, number one, I'm not the only gal but talking about it and encouraging women of color to run. But then also we have programs like we have research on how to address sexism on the campaign trail. We also, in that research, ask how do women of color address racism. So again, it's for us, it's finding those ways to make sure that it's a part of everything that we do. And it's not just me, yeah, to be honest.
Thank you. That's a lot of food for thought. I'm wondering the way that we're, Ashley, Clare, Amber, I mean, everyone really who's spoken uses the word leader, sort of means a lot of different things. And you can lead something by running an organization. You can lead something by running for office. I mean, there's lots of different ways that you can be a leader. Where do we need more leadership? And what sorts of leaders do we need to identify, allow to develop their talents, to fund? What sort of leadership do you guys see from your work is most lacking at the moment?
There was a telling moment that happened, not in this particular moment, but some few years ago in Ferguson, when there were certain members of the clergy who thought by virtue of the fact that they could afford to buy a plane ticket to go to Ferguson, that they would show up and be embraced as a leader, and got a rude awakening, which they should have. I think that what's needed are individuals who are willing to serve, who are willing to walk and not just run toward the microphone or the VIP section. And I'm thankful for a generation that's able to see through that, who has respect, but not enough respect to whereas they will not just let those individuals continue to shop and sell their wares. Someone said that if you call yourself a leader and you look behind you and no one's following you, all you're doing is taking a walk. But the biggest issue with the faith community is folk who believe by their status that they are leaders, who don't put any skin in the game, who don't groom anyone outside of their own family to succeed, who do not reach out even within their own ministries of young people to try to groom them to be these young public theologians, to allow the faith to speak to the issues and times of the day. So I think it's one in which the faith community has to look at everyone who comes through those doors as potential leaders, but also to see and view themselves in a position where they can learn from those who are actually doing the work. That's a challenge within the faith community.
I would also just say, who in here has seen The West Wing before? So I have been working in politics for about the last 17 years, and I just saw it for the first time last year. And I was like, I was about to cuss, there's kids in here. I was like, I realized that, I think like Josh Lyman, as much as I loved that character on there, I think he created some like really challenging management styles in particularly the Progressive and Democratic Party, where we think that like if you're just the roughest and toughest and you just like yell at people but you're smart at the same time, then you are a leader and like you are like the best of the best. But it left all these people behind that are like actually doing the work. And so I think it was, and I'm the same as Ashley, like you will not talk about my president, Barack Obama, but I do think that from being on the campaign in 2008 and working and doing stuff over the last couple of years, there was a creation, and this existed before Barack Obama's campaign too. There are a lot of leaders that are 5 years younger than me, 5 years older than me, in particular, a little bit older than millennials that, see ourselves as leaders, but there's a ton of people doing this work on the ground that every single day. And at 37, I feel, I'm not 37 yet. At 36, I have another week. And so at 36, I feel like I need to move over. And I've been working in the same type of movement for 3 years. But I feel like, again, that I shouldn't be the person who is at all of these different events and leading all these different movements within the gun violence prevention movement. But what I will say is the reason why I attend all of these things and I go to them is because there aren't any people of color who are on the national stage. And so when that changes, I'm out. And so that's part of what I have to discern every time that I'm doing this work is, can I bring somebody along with me? Does it make sense for me to be the voice of this movement? And that's, I think, a lot of the challenge, especially out of Ferguson as well.
Complicated microphone. I think something that we've noticed, one of the people who really inspired us in the very early stages. We're a group of 11 co-founders. We're all full-time students here at Harvard, most of us at the Kennedy School. And one of the people who inspired us as we were trying to figure out what to do was one of our friends' moms, who every single morning wakes up at her computer. She reads the newspaper. She emails her members of Congress. She calls them. She tells all of her friends what to do, and they really count on her for instruction. And she's doing that for no recognition, for no reason other than she is completely outraged by a number of policies at many levels. But she's never had a face-to-face conversation with those people about acting together. And so for us, there's not a dearth of leadership at any level. People are leaders in their communities, and they're just not recognized as such, and they view a leader as this, fancy person in a fancy place. But they're the people who are respected by their communities, who when they send that email, their friends actually call. I mean, that's what a leader is as you were saying, it's someone who has a following and they can deliver that following consistently. And so what our goal is, frankly, at Resistance School is to help those folks figure out that they really are leaders and to give them just a notch. It's not a huge jump, but a notch up as an excuse to get their friends together, their neighbors, their formal organization or informal, and actually start to work together and view themselves a little more formally as a leader.
I'd say authenticity is one thing that this last cycle certainly showed us. I'm with my colleague here. I guess I'd say don't come for Barack Obama with me. I'm absolutely in the camp. And in so many ways, I think about it. You think that Barack Obama would be the leader that inspires me most. If I look at this in a weird way, since November, Donald Trump has inspired me. And I think it's inspired a lot of folks because if it tells me anything, if Donald Trump can be president of the United States of America, I can do anything. And I think everybody else in this room can do anything. And if there's anything that we learn from this, it's that I think so many people often count themselves out of leadership because they feel like they have to put on some air. They can't be themselves. Well, I don't like who Donald Trump is necessarily. The reality is that he has been himself and has been authentic in a way that has really had a wide appeal to a lot of people that, for a lot of reasons I don't necessarily understand. But I think we need more leaders who are willing to just be authentic and step into the arena, if you will.
Can I just say a word to that? I mean, I think for the dearth of women in office isn't because, exactly as you talked about, it's not like there's all these amazing moms or women out there who are just already active in their communities. It's that because they've never, seen themselves in elected office. Truly, we just don't have enough numbers of women or women of color in office to be able to see that. But it's because women aren't running. And so that's why I see from our position is to be able to make an approachable access point to the candidate pipeline and to show that you don't have to be this perfectly polished, pearl-wearing, St. John's, whatever that brand is, suit-wearing person to be able to be an elected official someday. You can be you and run for office. And I think for too long, politics and the parties have been these gatekeepers that especially put first-time candidates, non-traditional candidates, almost through this hazing practice where we're not going to share with you our secrets to success or how to really run for office, and we can all know the reasons of why that isn't opened to many different types of people. But I think that's what's cool about these groups are creating an ecosystem of where you can say, no, we want you to be you. We need you as you are to be in these different types of leadership roles and just expand upon the leadership that you already do in your everyday life.
Let me start with Clare, but we've discussed this a little bit, but I'd like to get some tangible examples out here. Why does it matter to have diversity in power, whether corporate, political, whether racial, gender, sexual identity? Why does it matter? What difference will it make? Obviously for the, potentially the people holding that power, but why will that make a difference for the communities they come from?
Through She Should Run's lens, of course, we're focused on elected leadership. So I'll say this, one woman that we've featured quite a bit in our different programming is Marilyn Mosby out of Baltimore, state attorney, example of a black woman leader doing a pretty unpopular thing of taking the Freddie Gray police officers to trial. That was really politically risky. I will be curious to see how the rest of her career goes. But in terms of being able to tell her story of where she grew up, right, in this area, witnessed her cousin who grew up with her like a brother being murdered on the street in a wrongfully identified case, even though any murder is clearly wrong, and dedicated her whole life to public service. So she has turned this tragedy into a life of public service and making deeply unpopular decisions that were important to her city and to the community that she's come from. We have a story of a city councilwoman named Brianna Doe who is in D.C., young woman, being an 18-year incumbent, and she and a couple of other women on the D.C. City Council started the first hearings on street harassment in D.C. And she's told me stories about how a lot of her male colleagues said, I just had no idea. And so these are just a couple of examples of where when you don't have that lived experience, you're just simply not going to be able to legislate or make decisions on a wider perspective. And you're only going to be, again, maybe not in, I think sometimes it's not always sitting around going, woo-hoo-hoo, how can we screw over XYZ people, but it's out of sheer ignorance of not a lived experience. And so therefore you have to have different perspectives to make sure that you are governing as broadly as possible. Those are even just, I could sit here all day and tell you the stories of amazing different women who are expanding how elected leaders and government make an impact for larger and larger different groups of communities.
I would say without representation, and not just having someone in the room, but empowering them to have the power to speak up, and when they speak, to be listened to, is you're just one Pepsi commercial away, right? Like, you literally are. Because and I'll just really quickly, 30 seconds, an ad came out yesterday, Kendall Jenner? One of them, one of the Kardashian clan. They were in this Pepsi ad. They're a group of very attractive young millennials walking down the street in this very fun, as Very Smart Brothers, which is a very dope blog. If you don't read it, you should. Made a protest feel very Coachella-esque, right? Fun. She has this blonde wig on, and then all of a sudden gets a nod from a guitarist type of guy, and she rips this blonde wig off and takes her makeup off, making her very real into the movement, and joins the protest. And when you have civil disobedience, there are often law enforcement there that are supposed to keep the order, and she hands the officer a Pepsi can, and he drinks it, and the world is better. Just better. The problem is that the image that they were trying to recreate was an image after Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, and the police officers in Dallas had been killed, and there were protests in the street this past July, and a black woman was standing there in a sundress, and 3 police officers were charging her with SWAT gear, and she had her hands extended, and I cannot imagine what it would feel like to be that woman, but she was a very petite woman, and I believe she got arrested, probably. And she didn't have a Pepsi can, so maybe that would have saved her, but she didn't have one. But the first thing was the woman that originated the image was a black woman, and in the commercial they made it a white woman. So that's just wrong. That's just incorrect. That's just wrong, right? And if you don't get that by trying to replicate something, that's appropriating culture, right? Which is hurtful, especially when it's rooted in death, right? And the reason why the people were on the street and the reason why people protest is because people were being killed and people felt like nothing was being said or done about it. And people still have the fear that that is the reality. And under this particular administration, this law and order approach, it's only going to get worse. And I wake up every day nervous that that is what is going to happen again. And what happens in an administration where you don't have a leader like Barack Obama who is able to work to try and keep the peace between historically two communities that have had this real tension. So you get, and then you think that like a Pepsi is gonna be the thing that fixes it? I mean, I don't know. I'm a creative person, so I was trying to roll with them the whole way through, and I know what they were trying to go, but somebody along the way should have been empowered to be like, this is not good. And then, after that, the statement that was issued was an apology to the actress, Kendall, that was in it. So, I wrote something on Facebook yesterday. I was just like, okay, this is the day after Equal Pay Day. Go find a woman of color, pay her equally what you paid these ad firms to make this ad and paint your brand, and don't do it. Don't not engage on the issue, but don't do it so elementary, right? Like, the issue of police brutality is not fixed through soda or pop, right? It's just not. And to think that it could be minimized to that, I saw one of the leaders from Ferguson, who has become a dear friend and mentor, one of the ministers who is respected in the space because she has been there and continues to be there. And she thought, oh my goodness, to be a mom of one of the kids who have been killed because of these protests. Imagine what it feels like to have your child's life diminished to a Pepsi. And all you needed was to have representation in the room to make that mom not feel like that, but also just not to give up. It's like a hashtag, right? Like Pepsi Lives Matter. It's not, it's like, it felt cute and it really upset people, right? And I guess the question is, what is the goal, right? Like, do you actually care about engaging, or do you just really want to sell a product? And if you want to sell a product, then just be ready for the backlash, because what we do live in is a technology world, and we can organize by it, and we're not standing for it anymore. You cannot undermine taxi cab drivers when they are trying to protest and be with a group by lowering rates. You cannot undermine people when they are united and they are standing for something. It just is not going to be possible, especially when you have leaders like Rashad and leaders who, like Brittany, who will make a hashtag like Black Women at Work. We are not going to stand for it. And so I think the movement continues, I hope people don't keep making stupid ads like that, but the movement continues as long as there are not people who are representing and are being empowered to actually say, stop, this is wrong, think about it. Also, just like, if you're watching and you were in the commercial, like, was there no moment that anyone on set was like, this is not right? Or was it that the people who were on set were not empowered? Yeah. And that's a real question.
Good. No, I was just going to say really quick, we come, I guess personally, I come from an abolitionist mind frame. Like, I don't think anybody should be in jail, right? So but I will say that I used to say probably about 10 years ago that the system was broken, and the system's actually not broken. It's working just the way that it was set up, right? And so if we don't have people who are from these impacted communities that are saying mass incarceration is real, and it is driven by race, and it is driven by culture, and it is driven by economics, and we need to do something about it instead of just this law and order that not only Republicans but Democrats think about as well, then the system's going to keep working just fine, right? And so I think we have to think about that too when we think of how we talk about Congress and how we talk about the legal field. And that's why I'm so glad, like, a lot of these but also some of the older legal organizations that have existed have been able to do a lot of this work to protect the people who have the most to lose in this new administration. And so the other thing I would just say is that I have learned a lot over, especially the last 5 years, about the difference between equality and equity, right? Because I've gone through 7,000 leadership development trainings and learned about equality and had to sit down with a new person every time I start a new job and to talk about all this race and justice and inclusion. And at the end of the day, equality is us both having the exact same thing, but we didn't start at the exact same place, right? But equity is giving somebody like myself, who's a black woman from a small town in Midland, Texas, everything that I need to succeed and to lead, right? And so I think we get those conflated, especially when we start talking about race and justice and inclusion within the Democratic Party. And just by saying, by virtue, to Ashley's great point, there were black people and people of color in that video. And so I'm waiting for maybe the Medium post that's going to come out that's going to be I left that video and I stormed out and here's all my thoughts on why I did that. But I don't think it's going to actually come because the people who were there weren't either empowered or they were shut down from what they were saying. So I think that's also something that just having a black person or just having a woman in the room, if they aren't given the tools that they need to actually be successful, is extremely important.
Yeah, there's a thought about getting the right people on the bus and then the right people in the seats. I think that's the book, Going from Good to Great. But it is vitally important that we have an inside game and an outside game. And when we're on the inside, the conversation changes for the most part. All right, there's still some folk who are cavalier in their attitude, but when we're at the table, the conversation changes. In the musical Hamilton, one of the great songs, all the songs are great, talks about, and no one else was in the room when it happened. Yep. That all these decisions are being made and no one was there to witness. Look at the current pictures coming out of the current regime and who's in that room. When I graduated from college, Randall Robinson at Trans-Africa talked about the need for us to leave there and to be in the room. I want to sit on the school board in Ohio. I was 25. I didn't know any better. My hometown was 92% white, and yet I won the seat. And I learned then how important it was to be in the room because they knew who I represented and what I stood for. They knew I stood for local jobs. So then when they wanted to outsource the food service program, they knew they had to come with a way for me to vote for it. So what we decided to do is that you came with a deal that would include feeding our children during the summer, because they don't stop being hungry during the summer. I might support it, realizing that I didn't have the vote anyway, that many votes on my side. So they came back with a plan to feed children in our community over the summer. As a result, then also, they outsourced a lunch program, and there was a black pizza owner who got a contract. And most of that took place while I was in the room. It's not about the economic gain, though. It's about the principle of being there to make sure that nothing happens on our watch. But it just can't be anybody in the room. It has to be the right people on the bus in the right seats.
That's great. Let me ask a question about something that I feel like we've, again, touched on, but sometimes gets lost, which is policy. So sometimes it feels like now we're being ruled through symbolism, and we arguably have a White House that has few convictions, except possibly to make people's lives hard. But I think, we just heard from Thomas's example and the work that others are doing, that policy sort of is what motivates us or what matters, I think, in some ways. So how do you think about the sort of importance of public policy? Is it relevant for getting people to believe that that their vote's going to matter? We heard about that earlier. Will it obviously directly improves people's lives in theory? But how do you sort of connect policy, especially if you're working in a local community and you're thinking about policy at the state or even national level? How do you connect it directly to people's lives? Start with Yasmin.
I think one of the challenges that my colleagues in the resistance school and I have identified is that because of all of the energy coming out since the election, there's this linkage of every problem that we see linked to national policy. I think we've talked about police brutality, and the Black Lives Matter movement has been unbelievably important in changing the national conversation. But a lot of my friends who've been active have been active on talking to their congressmen, not to their state reps and to their state senators and to their city councilmen. And I think part of the gap is it's really not sexy to talk about state legislatures are super boring. City council testimonies are very boring. And it's just not, we don't have local media in the way that we had before. We don't have the same kind of local organizing that we had before. And on all sorts of issues, I think the question is, how do you connect the leaders that we've been talking about on this panel to where the policies that impact them most are actually happening? And a lot of that, I mean, you know, my classmate Wei is here. He and I are sort of obsessed with state legislatures, and we have the fewest number, Democrats have the fewest number of state legislatures controlled in 200 years right now. And that's not accidental. It's because we don't think that all the things that we talk about around the dinner table, there are a lot of ways to impact those at the state level, but we just, particularly progressives, for very good reasons of, you know, historically states have been problematic, right? I mean, a lot of the reasons why Democrats and progressives focus on federal policies because federal government saved states from doing really racist stuff in the 60s. And so now it's an interesting moment of thinking about kind of a new progressive federalism of taking back states and city councils. And a lot of the folks that have been tuning into the Resistance School got motivated and animated because of Trump, but the work that they're doing is in states, and it's in city councils, and we're really excited, and in school boards, and we're really excited about that.
I mean, we believe that, and have for years, that all roads lead through counties. Like, I'm from Texas, and so our county budgets are huge, and they're autonomous, and they have to go to the states to get them to approved. And I worked in Congress 15, 16 years ago, and like, no offense, but we don't really need them right now because they keep messing everything up. And so we need to make sure that they don't screw anything else up. But I do think the state legislatures are so important, but so are the counties, because, you know, not just the county, you know, judges, but like they do hold a lot of power whenever it comes to implementing policies we don't think enough about. And I'm so glad that Rashad was here because there's so much work that has been left on the table for so many years around prosecutors. We blame all the police chiefs, we blame all of the cops, which there's a lot of like challenges within a system, but there also are the people who actually have the prosecutorial discretion to charge people however they want to. And so a lot of our work, though, it does run through counties, but we know that we can't just focus on the counties and we can't just focus on the cities. So we just take a hybrid approach and we just kind of sprinkle in members of Congress whenever they're back in their districts. And, you know, we work with mayors because we know that all of these budgets, we just follow the money. And all the money is going in kind of the same different pockets. And the biggest budgets are at the county level in states like Texas. But a lot of it has to be approved through state legislatures. But again, like I think there's missing pieces, but I'm glad that there are people who are thinking more about some of these local races and how to get more influence. But I do think that like following the money of how people have power and influence is super important and how policymakers are going to make their decisions.
Yeah, I'd say is that I think what's so exciting about those 10,000 women who've signed up is that they're getting involved at the local level by applying for and getting appointed to local county commissions or their local city commissions. And I get really excited about that, but the folks in DC or their political circles or when we're talking to media just think like, meh. I think that is the starting point of where if you want folks to run for office, these are, again, folks who had never thought of getting involved at that level a year ago, 9 months ago, and now they're taking it, and what to them feels like very big risks to jump into a field that they do not understand or it seems unwelcoming to them. So I think it's part of a piece where we need to call out the elitism that is happening in national politics and that we're so obsessed with what is the sexiness of national politics, but it's those types of really important baby steps that I think I'm just really proud of our women, and that is what's going to keep up the momentum towards them staying engaged, I think.
And this is the year, Essence Magazine just called it, it's the year of the Black female mayor. So we are going with it. It's not going to stop this year, but it is going to happen. So watch out for Black women in power in mayor's offices.
Well, maybe we have an idea for what Ashley's going to do next. But
she should run. She should run.
Please, Jeohn.
I might say something on the policy piece. I mean, policy is that place where the rubber meets the road, and I think in the context of thinking about how we conceptualize some of the training sessions, for example, that we offer at the arena, we realize that people oftentimes count themselves out because they realize, or they think they don't know enough. They think that you have to be an expert on education and on foreign policy and on international economics or local economic development, on all these things before you can step out and run for office, before you can put yourself out there, before you can lead. And yet again, there's something that we've learned. You really don't have to know that much to be become the leader of the free world. Yeah. I guess if I were to even take it back a step further, to reprise the initial question you posed to us, what's one of the big challenges that we face here? It's both, when I think about movements in the past, whether it's civil rights or suffrage or the gay rights movement, there's been a clear sort of policy objective. People know what they're working toward. One of the things that's been so difficult in this last year or so is that you don't really know exactly what you're fighting against on the substance of it. I know that there's an idea, there's a person, there's a sort of nebulous, I won't say enemy necessarily. Yeah, there's a nebulous sort of something out there that I oppose, but it's been really hard to structure a substantive answer. My background is in foreign policy, so it's on the national level, someone might make a statement and say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I'm like, this doesn't really make sense, and it's been hard to come up with substantive answers when they're the sort of actual policy is just so ill-defined or not defined. So I guess I'll just say that you don't have to know everything or that much to get out there and get in there. And I think the movement will continue to struggle with this sort of sometimes analysis paralysis where we think we have to have all the answers before we can actually get in the fight. And that's even harder when the sort of idea that you're opposing or you're resisting against is so ill-defined.
That's terrific. I think we can start taking questions. If folks could grab the mic. I'm going to ask one more while people get ready for questions. So a lot of fans of President Obama here. Agree or disagree that his administration and its presence was shielding us from a lot of deep-seated long-term problems? I'd like to hear that.
I want to make sure I understand the question. You mean like the racial backlash? Is that?
So that if we're thinking about progressive infrastructure and sort of the progressive movement, if there's a progressive movement, so take, for example, the one that would be hard to disagree with was Yasmin's example of state legislatures. It wasn't suddenly in 2016, right? But do you think there was a complacency that came out of the fact that we had someone said that he sort of the president was there to protect us from some bad things? But when you think more broadly about the progressive infrastructure, that there was sort of a complacency that came out of, well, Obama won't let this happen.
I mean, I think everyone, look, we were coming from like George W. Bush in 2008, right? Like everyone wanted this savior in chief, right? And that's not President Obama's fault. That's our fault as a citizen. And he knew he couldn't carry that burden, I've never asked him, but I'm sure he knew, right? As being like the savior of the world, right? Right, I'm sure like, he said Michelle would have told him. I'm sure the First Lady would have said that to him. But I think I'll point out like a couple things that we were doing in the administration, because the one thing to remind you is that like he was then elected to be, I think it's like the absence of what is happening now, which is giving everyone so much heartburn, is that the president was elected to be the leader of our country and to lead and not necessarily like organize the Democratic Party, right? And so we did, that's why I'm saying like what happened in 2016 is not because intergovernmental every and to running, and in his last now Obama, this false narrative that we didn't and you're trying in this movement. I actually want you to do some like where you were. I'm being treated. Gave him a nobody. What there has now everyone's like not around some of your friend because they don't people of color them and the need to be I think that's just we're surprised. I'd love to have for a while. Glad you're.
I literally. Thought America was did Barack Obama. And, I feel like about this. I just is just a loss. I will go back to existed and can and the all the exact I that I have, right? And about right and beyond really it doesn't mean fight with us.
Seen that. So country managing peaking what he was in politics, and I've never. He's a living. I'm sure he's been struggling with a lot. Massachusetts is an expensive place to live. Security guard as someone who can think with his about comment in their
round. Working there are people
people job that can't get a rent check, but half my board formerly incarcerated people because of, and even my privilege of not ever interested and Hamas. That who's programs are so it's not a, especially on like the city level. DC has done
I said,
theory that there, and it's like in that community, you should care about it. Yeah, that's true. But like, if you're gonna pay someone else, why not invest in the people who have it actually at their heart, who live and breathe it every day?
Probably just have time for the last question. Anyone? I'm going to give everyone a chance to just share one more thought. I don't know if you don't mind, Yasmin, going first, a closing thought. Oh, no, we have, I'm sorry. Andrew, please.
The organizations that are represented, what are you looking at towards this next year, 2 years, and what kind of resources would it take to make those visions happen? What are the, if we're dreaming big, and what would it take to get you where you want to expand the work that you're doing for the next 2 years?
Money. I'm just kidding.
I mean, I know.
Yes.
I have a number. No, I'm kidding. So we have actually done an analysis on the cost of violence, right? So we know how much, I think it's around about $229 billion a year is spent around, we can't quantify it exactly, on gun violence, right? So that's like hospitals, it's death, it's like funeral costs, all that type of stuff. And we have, and it depends on what city and it depends on what county, for the first time, really analyze what a city's or county's cost for peace is, right? Because we went to the federal government and we said, give us $500 million over 5 years, and we will, decrease homicides in these top 20 cities where there's over 50 homicides a year. Give us $500 million, which to the federal government is nothing, right? And to a lot of companies is nothing. So when we go to conversations with funders or with, folks in the business community, we do talk about, especially like if there's a specific city, and again, we're working in around 22 of them over the next 18 months, both on the C3 and C4 side, that we really sit down and talk about the cost for peace and what that would actually look like. Because for a lot of people, we're like, I was talking to Ashley about this before, we're launching a campaign in June, a Peacemaker partnership campaign, where we're working with media influencers and elected officials to come on board to support these efforts and do kind of a public awareness campaign. And people now actually have a choice, right? We are asking everybody to be a part of this. We're using all of the different candidates that we know. We're using every megaphone, whatever microphone we have to talk about this. If you do not sign up to be a part of this effort, you are signing up to be on the side of people who are just okay with what is happening in our communities. And I'm not just talking about Chicago. I'm talking about Richmond, California. I'm talking about Richmond, Virginia. I'm talking about Houston. I'm talking about Dallas. And so if anybody here has buckets of money, we are in the business of taking that money. But we do actually have an analysis, and we're looking around hopefully by the next, in between the next 3 to 4 years, getting with a group of people, because I think was something that's really important, not just to make a plug for you guys, but making sure that the national groups that are working nationally are connected with the local groups. Yes. And over half of our budget goes to more than half of our budget goes to re-grants to states and local organizations who are doing this work and metrics-driven work on the ground. So, but yeah, that's how we're thinking about the next 2 years.
Yeah, and I don't want to be flippant. Resources are huge. For us, it's we want to see these 10,000 women moving through the incubator programs. We want to get as many of them appointed to local commissions. It's going to take, if you think about Emily's List, raised over $90 million last year for their candidates, $90 million. And we saw increases in more women of color in the Senate. On the Democratic side, we saw an increase of some women in the House, but we're still about 20% Congress, and that's still mostly Democratic women, $90 million, and we made this much of an increase. If we did an analysis of looking at the other nonpartisan C3 Women in Politics early pipeline groups, including us and about 5 other groups, we only collectively fundraise about $5 million a year. We cannot solve the problem of not having enough women running or resourced or supported to run along the entire pipeline and have the pipeline connected. That's a problem, is right now there is no incentive to connect the pipeline between different organizations. That's going to take even more than $90 million. So that's where we're focused on, is how do we support all of these women and have the funds to be able to do so, but then also be able to collaborate and make the pipeline an actual pipeline, as opposed to a few different pipes scattered throughout countries and different local communities.
Yeah, I'm amazed working in the mayor's office in D.C. at the number of young people who are actually employed as the mayor's hands and feet out in the community, some 16 full-time, and most of them are under the age 30. I think what we have, as a friend of mine, Eddie Glaude, states, an opportunity gap in our country. And there are so many young people who want to serve and who are willing to learn at certain levels and grassroots levels who can't afford to do so. All right? It's not feasible for them to work retail in a day and then go in the community and work. And I've known someone like that, someone when I was at the Children's Defense Fund who was in graduate school at Carnegie Mellon, who was from Phoenix, Arizona. Her grandmother took care of her little daughter while she was at grad school. She took the internship program at Children's Defense Fund for free. Luckily, a church member had a job for the summer. She slept on that person's couch, worked at the Limited in the evening just to take advantage of an internship. But now she's working in Health and Human Services in Arizona. I think that if we had someone supporting a huge public service opportunity, particularly since the current regime is talking about scaling back AmeriCorps and the like, that would help a lot, because there's a gap there. Not too many college students of color can afford to take an internship for free during the summer, or can work for free when they graduate from college. So I think that we can support them at that level. We have a weak bench on the progressive side, a weak bench, and we need to develop that bench. We need to have a farm team, and that farm team is called service.
So I can't answer very long-term questions because we launched last Tuesday. Our launch was changing our Facebook cover photos, and that's it. That was our launch, and the next morning we had 500 signups, and like I said, last night we had 15,000 people with not a dollar spent on, actually we spent like $1.43 on a Facebook ad just to see what that experience was like, but it was completely organic. It was really, really exciting, but we were like, could we convince our moms to sign on to this? Like, well, maybe 100 people sign on, and then it moved up to 15,000. So for us, it's every week for the next 3 weeks from now. So it's a 4-week total training. And we just did this really as an experiment to see if we could then partner with other groups and have them learn from our experience. And now, given the unbelievably inspiring and exciting scale of energy and excitement, way beyond what we imagine, we're starting to think we don't have those long-term answers. But I think, to Claire's point, I think the real thing that we are thinking a lot about is the web of all these organizations. Because, look, like even if we had a big pile of resources and all of us decided to do this full time and officially become, I mean, we're operating through a Venmo account. We each donated $100, so we have a $1,000 budget. I mean, it's just, we're just getting off the ground. But even with unlimited access to resources and, actual office and things like that, the question is, are we helping, right? If we're doing the same thing that a bunch of other groups are doing, let's not do it. And so for us, it's really, and we've been really, really inspired by how many groups have been talking to us about that and being very frank about, we've tried this type of training, this is what worked, this is what didn't, this is how we've dealt with online versus offline. And so, frankly, I think the resources, obviously, for every single one of these efforts is a gap, but I think that the more complicated gap is actually that strategic collaboration and dividing and conquering in a way that even when organizations disagree or don't have exactly the same mission, they can at least say, as you said earlier, inside we're going to be disagreeing, but publicly we are going to align because the movement really needs like all hands on deck and needs a broad-based coalition. And that's really, really hard to do in something that's not just leading to the 2008 Obama election, where there was a great coalition, 2012, great coalition, but how you sustain those over time is really hard. So we're hoping to figure that out and then figure out if we exist in 4 weeks or not.
And measure it. We spoke a lot in the other panel about measurement and evaluation, but there needs to be funding for organizations that are already so stretched for resources to actually, and I think very often my experience has been just trying to, it's not always the jazziest thing to fund, but to be able to show your measurement of success, you need to be able to have the resources to be able to do so. So that's something also for folks if they're thinking about new funding areas. M&E is important for groups.
We're about to get kicked out of here, so I want Jeohn, if you want to say anything, and Ashley, final works?
Sure. I'd say on that question, we're people for sure to stay involved and stay energized. We need resources for sure to fund these things. And I guess just to keep that momentum going. One of the things that we do at the arena is, we bring people in. We certainly try to inspire folks. We try to offer training. But after the summits are over, we're trying to build a community. And we're doing that largely through regional cohorts. So we're bringing people from all over the country to the summit, and we're then connecting them with people from their area so they can keep it local. All politics is local in that sense. So hopefully those groups continue to just kind of keep things going there. That said, on top of that, though, we're looking to try to be that Y Combinator of the political or the progressive space there. I was pleased to see Catherine Vaughn from Flippable, I think on one of the earlier panels, who's one of our first Arena Fellows, which is a program that we're starting to try to, again, support new organizations who are rising up and trying to figure out all these questions. And that also takes a resource, or the funding. So yes, you can go to our website at thearena.run, RUN, and check us out. And there's a link there where you can contribute to some of that.
I think you got the most plugged in. I would just say that despite my critique, if you know me, you know I'm very critical of stuff. I think that that's fine to be, because I do it. But I think I'm still also very, very hopeful. Because one of the most memorable experiences from the Obama administration for me personally, and I got to go through a lot of really awesome opportunities, was when the president opened the African American Museum this past fall. And it will sit with me until the day I die. But at the end of first of all, it was the first time really in my whole entire life I felt seen as a person. And I was like, I know growing up, like we passed the chapter in geography about Africa, like they, sometimes told us that slavery was a necessity, like all of that stuff, and I knew it was all wrong. But I was like, you will never be able to deny me again of my history and where I come from. But other than that, the thing that happened on that day was after it was all said and done, there was a bell, a freedom bell, that the president rang with the First Lady and his family. And one of the people on the stage, I think she was maybe 100 or maybe a little bit over 100, her father was a slave. And she knew her father. So the president was literally on stage with someone who knew a slave. The first black president was on stage. And I just thought about her life, and to know a slave, and then to know a man who is leading the country that once owned your father, the possibility of what can happen in my lifetime is endless. So I am really hopeful. I just think we have to be super responsible and diligent in this moment, and I do think we will have radical change.
Round of applause. Thank you. Well, thank you. I think that's the end of the... Jeff, do you want to say a word? Sorry.
Well, I recognize we are already sort of at time or over time. So mainly I just want to thank everybody for coming, all of the panelists, moderators, everyone in the room, and everyone who is tuned in on the live stream. I think we've heard a lot of great things about building community just in this room amongst the community of people who are interested in sort of funding organizations, leading organizations, doing grassroots activism, and the more sort of political, formal side of that. And hopefully the conversations today will lead to changes that come from all of us working together as a community, and that help benefit everybody in their local communities. So I just want to thank everybody for showing up. It's been a great day, and hopefully many people will rewatch this on video and everything, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
A couple of donations going your way at least.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind.